Hey, yo, Thor is one of the best 1v1 heroes in the game and an absolute force to be reckoned with. But he's not necessarily one of the easiest characters to play, especially in the meta we have currently. I play Thor all the way through GM and most of my climb in Celestial as well. I'm going to break down a thorough guide on how to play Thor, as well as talk about some of the adjustments happening in the patch going into the next season, so that you guys as well can climb all the way up with Thor. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Thor is a very interesting character because the way your cooldowns and abilities work are determined by the amount of Thor Force you have. 2 out of 3 of your main abilities do actually consume only 1 Thor Force, whereas the final, most dominant Thor Force ability does consume 3. It's very interesting because you do generate 1 Thor Force every 5 seconds, and after you have done your Storm Surge, which is your dash/displacement attack, if you do primary melee, you do generate a Thor Force back. The other cool part about the Thor Force, which is these hammers you are seeing in the middle of your screen, each can give you 100 bonus health. This is when you consume your Thor Force, you generate 100 bonus health. Rude Awakening is the one that consumes all 3 hammers of Thor Force, but only generates you a bonus of 200 bonus health. And it does, like I said, consume 3 points of Thor Force power. While you are in this state as well, that is the only ability you can use for the entirety of its duration. The consumption cooldown also on these hammers, this Thor Force, is 1.5 seconds. And then, of course, cumulatively, you do get that generation every 5 seconds per Thor Force. So your primary fire we're talking about that can be helped to use your Thor Force or generate Thor Force is going to be your Mjolnir Bash, which is just hitting people with your hammer. It does have a 4-meter range, which is pretty nice. Thor's probably got some long arms over there. It does 45 damage per hit, and you are weaving this with some of your other abilities in order to animation cancel or just to optimize the damage you have. Of course, one of the main kind of abilities you use with this is going to be your hammer throw, but I say main with an asterisk, just as one of those abilities you can use to animation cancel. I do not think this should be one of your primary usages of any of your Thor Force, whereas it does consume 1. It kind of leaves you kind of out and just, you know, in the open a little bit. It just feels weird. Like, you can use this to give you a little bit extra range, but you are not using this as a primary damage dealer. You can use it to burst down squishies, but not necessarily as something you want to use instead of like displacing people. While it does optimize some of your damage output, it's definitely not something I would use all the time. I would use it if someone is escaping on low health to try and just finish off the kill. The first ability you actually do have with Thor is going to be your hammer throw. This does consume 1 Thor Force and can be used to help animation cancel through your primary attacks to be able to burst out as much damage as possible. But I still think this is definitely something you use sparingly. While it does give you that extra damage, you can throw it to have a little bit of extra range. You only really use this on the off chance that an opponent is really getting away from you and you just need to land that final hit, or if you are bursting down a squishy. But I don't really like this consumption of the Thor Force. I would much rather push my opponents away or towards my team with the Storm Surge for the displacement and consume the Thor Force there instead of just throwing the hammer out. Of course, that is a bit different because one is pushing away and one is just to optimize potential damage, but I wouldn't use this really all that often at all. It's kind of a waste of Thor Force in my opinion. Whereas the Storm Surge, which also does cost 1 Thor Force, it has 2 different ways you can use this. So 1, you can use this for a primary way to just move around the map, be able to take up space, or be able to push people into your team, displace them from their healers, knock people over walls. You can angle this upward and kind of like shoulder check someone up into the air and back, or up into the air and forward. There's more ways you can kind of use this ability. opposed to just throwing your hammer out with hammer throw, which is really cool. Like when you look at the specifics of the Storm Surge as well, with no charge, you can cover 10 meters of space. With a full charge, you can cover 20 meters of space. A full charge, of course, does take 2 seconds, so there is a charge up there, which this is going to be really nice also with Thor's increased movement speed that he is getting in season 2, which he is going from 600 movement speed to 650. So he's already going to be able to move quicker, and you're also going to have this to enable you to take up even more space faster, while you're also hitting an opponent with this. The speed and the kind of area you can take up is going to be decreased. So originally with no charge, you can, move 10 meters. But if you do push an enemy, you only move 6. If you do fully charge, you will, move 20 meters with an enemy. If you are in with someone and able to push them, you will only move 13 meters. And of course, there is different damages for each of these pushes too. No charge, you do 40 damage. Full charge, you do 60 damage. But the main goal, and I think the way you want to be playing Thor, is to displace enemies. Think of it as like kind of a Bucky hook with less CC, or think of being able to get people into a Groot wall, or be able to get Groot over his own wall. You're mainly trying to knock people back into your team, escape, or knock them out of the line of sight of their healers, so then you can burst them down, because Thor is, one of the best one-on-one heroes in the game. And this is also really interesting to note with this as well. When you do use your Storm Surge, your hammer will proc blue. If your hammer is glowing blue, that means your next melee attack will generate Thor Force for you. So you can dash into someone and then primary fire your left click or your right trigger if you're on console, and then you're going to be able to get a stack of Thor Force back, and you can go in straight into potentially an Awakening Rune, or just continue to displace people over and over and over again, because that is one of the main things you're trying to do, is take up space, displace, and just burst people down. And with that in mind, moving over to his next ability, which is going to be the Lightning Realm. The Lightning Realm is the only ability that Thor has that is not going to be on a cooldown and dependent on his Thor Force. I say not on a cooldown, meaning just the Thor Force cooldown. It is on its own separate cooldown, which is going to be 12 seconds. It is a spherical radius of 5 meters. Spherical, kind of think of how like Jeff's ult is spherical. You have to be within a certain radius, diameter, and then there's also a height to it, which is very interesting. The duration of the Lightning Realm is going to be 4 seconds, and you deal 40 damage when enemies cross into the bubble. And for each enemy that is also in the spell area, you get 1 point of Thor Force. So you can use this into an ultimate, so your enemies are also slowed, because enemies, movement speed is also reduced by 30% when they cross into the boundary. This is also really good to help deal with divers, because you are supposed to flex back and rotate back as a tank to help your team as well. So you do have some anti-dive tech. It's not going to be some crazy tech like some of these other Vanguards or Duelists, but this does give you an opportunity to slow down enemies to allow your team to be able to burst them down. But more often than not, you are using this, in my opinion, to use more of your Awakening Rune to continue to just sling that out repeatedly, because that is the most damage you can deal with Thor, and is my personal favorite, usage of the Thor Force, which we'll talk about that in a second. But it also does allow you to get some better benefits from your ultimate. Because of this slowing, they can't necessarily escape after the radius. This also is a very good ability to help you with your ultimate, to help you more often than not get more of the KOs you wouldn't get, because people normally just run out of Thor's ultimate, or they just kind of sit in there. But the closer they are to you, of course, you're going to be doing more damage in that way too. And if they can't escape, they're also going to be hitting by the chain lightning in the ultimate. But we'll talk about that also in a second. Now, let's talk about the Awakening Rune. The Awakening Rune is what I think is the best, or maybe second best ability. It just depends on what you like to do more. The Storm Surge with the movement is incredible. But the Awakening Rune is where your damage comes from. So the Awakening Rune does have one of the slowest projectiles in the game with a projectile speed of 60 meters per second. And it's really interesting when you look at the stages of your Awakening Rune too, because there is 3 stages. There's which are your first 3 throws, which are going to be 0.4 seconds each, and then your last stage is going to be 0.8 seconds each. So it's really interesting. Your slow kind of like your throw kind of slows down a little bit more as you are throwing out this lightning that does 70 projectile damage, and it does 15 spell field damage, which is really interesting. It is on a 5-second duration. During those 5 seconds, you cannot use any other abilities, so keep that in mind as well. If you are going to Awaken Rune, make sure you're in a place where you're not necessarily going to get trapped and you still are in line of sight of your team, because you're not going to be able to dash away until it is up, because afterwards, since it does last 5 seconds, you will have 1 Thor Force up to be able to escape, which is really nice. Or if you're really going crazy, you can then pop your Lightning Realm, potentially get your Awakening Rune back, and just repeatedly throw that out, which is something they changed in the patch, in the 1.5 patch, which was really nice. The range is also a 3-meter spherical range for the projectiles as well. So you're going to have a larger kind of hitbox to be able to hit people spherically instead of just being straight on, which is nice. But this does a lot of damage. You can use it to be a ranged attack if you are really accurate. You can use that to burst down opponents in the back line, kind of aiming past like a Magneto or a Strange Shield. But more often than not, if you are diving in, you want to use this to burst down healers, which should more often than not enable you to win the team fight. Do not really use this against tanks unless they are low, because they're just going to tank that damage, and then the healers are just going to be able to get the Vanguards way back up to health, and they're going to be able to charge their ult better. So if you use it more on the squishies, you are going to get more value, but you can throw this long range because it does not have like a damage fall off like at all. You just have to be accurate. So whether you're using this to immediately start with a team fight to go ahead and get some of these squishies low so your team can burn them down, or even you can burn them down, that's one of the main usage I would use for your Awakening Rune. I am popping this like crazy to do as much damage as possible and burst down as many people as possible and just be a threat. You can also use this, like I said, as a just great 1v1 tool. That is one of the main reasons why they say Thor is a great one-on-one tank, because of how much damage he can do with these Awaken Runes. And it is just incredible. Moving on to the ultimate, which is going to be the God of Thunder. It is going to be a cylindrical 8-meter radius, which is going to be 20 meters high. So you can hit flyers within this. You're not going to deal as much damage as you will with the slam, but they can get hit with some of this lightning. It is a 1-time spell field with an 8-meter spherical radius, and you are 9 meters high off the ground. The duration is going to be 1.5 seconds. You deal 40 damage in the spell field for the half a second, and then while you land, you do 220 damage. It is going to be a 3,100 costs ultimate, which is going to be kind of more on the cheaper side. Of course, the cheapest is going to be 2,800. But one of the best ways to use this is to either force out healer ults so you can get better value for your duelist whenever they ult, or even just to be able to KO the backline of your opponents. You are using this more often than not to try and force ults. That is kind of what I've been doing more with this. But if you can manage to actually get some KOs with this, you get even more value, since this is kind of a weaker, I would say, ultimate, unless you are paired up with a rocket. Because with a rocket within the current patch, we haven't done testing, of course, with Rocket in the new patch just yet, but you can actually KO through Luna ult with the God of Thunder ultimate. So you can do that extra damage with that 40% boost. We'll see how it is with the 25% boost with Rocket's change in the patch. But this can do damage if it does get boosted by another ultimate, maybe even like a Mantis buff or like a Luna extra damage. So keep that in mind. Another tool of thumb is what I was saying too, is to use your Lightning Realm right before your ultimate so your enemies are slowed, so you can actually kind of track them better in your ultimate because you can move with your ultimate too. Or if you also are lower to the ground in your ultimate, you slam the ground faster. So that is if you're under a bridge or under a ceiling, you're going to be lower in the air while you're in your ultimate, so you potentially can slam the ground quicker and be able to either dash to enemies, burst them down, or even KO them with your ultimate, which is also really solid. One of the unfortunate downsides with this new season, though, is that you are losing your team up with Storm and Cap. So you are the anchor of the team up currently, but in this next season, you are losing that 100 health buffer. So that's unfortunate, but they did actually buff your base health from 525 to 600. So you are losing 25 health overall from the last season to now, but you're going to be up to 600, which will be nice, as well as that increase on the movement speed. You do also have one of the better team-ups in the game as well, which is going to be the Odinson Reborn, which is the revival you get when Hela lands a final hit. You do revive with 80% of your health, which is really nice, opposed to an Adam Warlock res, where you are only going to respawn now with the patch up to 30% of your health. You also do get 50% or 50, not 50%, you do get 50 bonus health when Hela does land a final hit. And your respawn is going to be 1.5 seconds, though. There is an animation that does happen once you respawn. It doesn't happen just immediately, so it does take a second. So just keep that in mind when Hela does land final hits to be able to revive you. This is also, of course, with Loki. It's Loki, Thor, and Hela. I would say there are some pretty tough matchups for Thor. I still think Groot still is a tough matchup, even though you can get over the wall from Groot being able to have your Storm Surge and just be able to dash above it. It still is not that great, especially depending on how you're managing your cooldowns. Since I like to Awaken Rune a lot more, you have to be more cognitive of burning all 3 of your Thor Force charges and being more manageable of just making sure you have an out instead of necessarily doing all that damage until Groot is out of the way or Groot is low. Since Groot does also have a pretty large hitbox, you can burst him down a lot with your Awakening Rune, but like I said, you're not focusing on tanks, you're really trying to use that on squishies. So I really wouldn't necessarily use that against Groot. I would still just try and keep your Storm Surge up as much as possible. Of course, Wolverine is just another one of those characters that is a really bad matchup for Thor as well, since Wolverine can just grab you and move you completely out of the way, get you away from your team, and you're just burst down. You do, of course, have Storm Surge to be able to escape potentially from Wolverine, or even Lightning Realm to kind of slow him down a little bit, and then Storm Surge, kind of doing both of those. And with Storm Surge, of course, you do get the 100 health, which can help you also escape. So you have a little bit of overshield to get across, which is also nice, but still very tricky. And then, of course, you do have your Punisher, your Bucky, your Hela, your Hawkeye, just some of these DPS that do a lot of damage. They can just headshot you and just really just chip away at your health, or pretty much almost not insta-kill you, but like really take you down. Since you do not have shield, you of course have the overshield from using your abilities, whether that is your Storm Surge or your Hammer Throw or Awakening Rune, just get a little bit extra health. Still, you don't have a frontal shield in front of you, so you need to play more around cover in that sense, or try and just take off angles or take them by surprise. Of course, the Thing, you cannot move the Thing either, so that's a pretty tough matchup. Not the worst matchup, because you can still do damage to the Thing, but he can also just root you, so you cannot dash out, and then you're also down there. And then, of course, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl can also just root you, so you're just stuck there and having to take damage. You cannot escape from that at all. So it's very, those are just some very unfavorable matchups, but some of the better matchups for you are going to be like a Doctor Strange, a Magneto, a Hulk. Those are 3, just 2 of those are shield tanks. One of them is another brawler. You can push around the Hulk. You can push around Strange. You can push around Magneto. You can fly over them. You can knock them up and around. Like, that's one of the main things I was thinking there. Of course, magic in the same sense can knock you up, but you also can kind of sustain, and since she has to get close to you, you can get close to her and deal damage to her, keep up with her, slow her down a little bit with your Lightning Realm as well. Venom, you can also knock Venom out of place. You can body block Venom and try to get him away from being able to swing, knock him maybe out of a swing, some animation stuff. Like, there's some just good value you can get into the Venom matchup too, being able to burst him down with some of this Rune Awakening. Same with Spidey, you're using the Spell Shield to be able to kind of get off of Spidey, which is the Lightning Realm, to be able to slow him down so your opponents can knock him out. You can also Storm Surge him and knock him out of place to kind of offset what movement he's trying to do. Moon Knight is someone I've seen people try to take a lot of off angles with, and there's going to be a lot more Moon Knight play with this next patch and this next season. And you can jump up to the Moon Knight angles, make him, if you force him to have to use one of his onks on you, that's honestly a plus. Of course, you do not stand in the onk radius, or you will get bursted down, but you can use that to your advantage to force him off of height and give your team a better shot of being able to take him down, which is one of the main things I was talking about with the displacement too with Thor. Your goal is to force people off of off angles and take off angles. You're not necessarily going to be just throwing your Awakening Rune to just murk people from across the map. You're mainly trying to help people on your team, whether that is bashing tanks into your back line or bashing tanks into your front line, like protecting or not protecting, bashing your opponent's tanks away from their healers, their line of sight. If there's a Hela on an off angle, if there is a Moon Knight on an off angle, you are jumping off to that to force them to pressure you and give your team space so they can move forward. You're able to burst down these Moon Knights and these Helas with your Awakening Rune since you are such a great one-on-one competitor. So you're using your Thor to be able to take over off angles, assert dominance in that sense. You don't necessarily have to win these team fights in order to get the Thor value, as long as you are making it so it is one less heavy damaging opponent looking at your team. That is a plus. If you can force healer ults out by using your own ult, so you have better opportunities for your duelists to use their more substantial and stronger ults to burst down the enemy team, that is also a plus. Use all of your cooldowns, like I was saying, based on your matchups though. That is the other thing. If you're going into Groot, you need to make sure you're using your Storm Surge more. If you're going more into some of these shields, such as like a Hulk, Thor even, though he doesn't have a shield, like those kind of brawly matchups, you're going to have a more of a better opportunity to be able to use your Awakening Rune to get value, opposed to some of these other characters that just block off what you're trying to do. With that in mind, I do want to just continue to reiterate, you are supposed to force people out of line and punish them. Thor is that guy. And hopefully with this next season as well, he continues to be able to be that secondary tank. Definitely not a main tank. Please do not main tank Thor. But I think this character has continued just to get value. And as characters continue to try and get more off angles, they need someone to be able to take them off of those off angles. And Thor is that guy. He is my guy, and he's soon to be your guy. And if you guys did stick around to the very end of the video, I really do appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed this type of content, please let me know down below. Let me know what other characters you guys enjoy playing, or any guides you would like to see for other characters as well. Thank you guys once again just so much for watching. God bless. It's been real, and Tucker out.